For 70 years, the four men represented in this statue have inspired an entire nation. Their story was not just one of triumph against adversity on a sporting field, but a struggle against oppression and terror.
Выйти под дулами автоматов и играть, и выигрывать – это непросто.
It was said in the Soviet Union that these players defied Nazi orders and beat a German team during the Second World War, and as a result were all shot.
Власть решила вот этот матч преподносить его как для воспитания патриотических чувств.
Their team was called FC Start, and that game was known as the Death Match. But the story that was told for generations, the story that helped inspire the film Escape to Victory, turned out to be largely a myth constructed by the former Soviet state. The truth was more complex. This is a story about a group of players who wanted to survive, play football and win. For some of them, it would end in tragedy. Since their inception, Dynamo Kiev have had a strong bond with their city. They've been successful as well, winning countless league titles as well as 3 European trophies. This club has always had style, and that lineage can be traced back to the 1930s and a burgeoning Soviet league. But football was interrupted in the summer of 1941 when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union and occupied Kiev.
Все мы относились к унтерменшам, были лишены средств к существованию. Жители города получали 200 грамм хлеба на неделю.
Немцы были хозяева, и не могли каждого хотеть миловать, а хотеть стрелять.
Soon after occupying Kiev, the Nazis started rounding up the Jews. And over 2 days, at the end of September 1941, they murdered 33,771 of them here at a place called Baba Yar. After initially fighting at the front, the majority of Dynamo players returned to Kiev and, as ex-Red Army soldiers, had to keep a low profile.
Most of Dynamo Kiev had to go and find some work. Anyone who hadn't had a job would be immediately arrested.
The players found shelter thanks to Josef Kordik, a Kiev citizen who claimed German origins. That meant he could run one of the city's bakeries on this street, and he was a passionate Dynamo fan.
It was Josef Kordik's idea to create a team. Nikolai Trusevich, the goalkeeper, used to be a baker, so he found a job at this bakery in Kiev, and Kordik asked Trusevich to invite all other players, and so they started training initially at the bakery courtyard.
The Germans realised that unrelenting brutality was not a way to run an occupied territory. The people needed an outlet, and so the authorities were convinced by a Nazi sympathiser, Georgy Shvetsov, to allow football to restart. FC Start were made up mainly of Dynamo Kiev players, and they played here at the Zenit Stadium in red shirts they found abandoned in a warehouse. Their charismatic goalkeeper Nikolai Trusevich was the centre point of the team, always laughing and joking. The pick of the defence was young Alexei Klimenko. Makar Honorenko played on the wing, whilst up front the team relied on Ivan Kuzmenko, one of the best strikers in the Soviet Union. Nikolai Korotkir was one of the elder members of the team. He hadn't played much for Dynamo, but he had a big part to play in FC Start. The team played their first game against FC Rook, and despite being malnourished and overworked, they won all their other games. It's not clear what the Germans thought about FC Start's success, but on August the 6th, 1942, here, Start played a German military team called Flakelf. The result? Another win for the men in the bakery, and smarting, the Germans ordered a rematch just 3 days later. The Soviet myth states that the players were implicitly told not to win by the Germans for fear of reprisals. In reality, no evidence has ever proved this. Here at the Great Patriotic War Museum in Kiev, there's a rare poster from the rematch, but there is one word that really stands out in both Ukrainian and German: revenge.
What is interesting here that they proposed a rematch 3 days after this game. That simply wasn't enough for the FC Start to rest, and the German team could drain. So it was clear that this time it was very important for the Germans to win.
Количество людей на стадионе по тем меркам было много. Почему? Это было где-то 1,500–2,500.
Accounts of the game itself vary wildly, but what is certain is that Start were leading 3-1 at half-time and went on to win 5-3. It's after the final whistle that the Soviet myth really gains momentum. Their story is that the players were immediately brought here to Baba Yar and, still in their football kit, shot. The reality was very different. A week later, they played another game against the nationalist Rook side and thrashed them 8-0. Soon after, the Germans arrested and interrogated them. Why that happened is hard to say for sure, but what we do know is that these 4 men represented on the statue died. One, Nikolai Korotkir, was a Soviet security officer.
Уже был арестован, что потом его дальнейшая судьба никто не знает. И что с ним сделал? Ну, понятно, что он не выдержал пыток и, конечно, погиб там.
Most of the players ended up at the concentration camp at Sirets next to Baba Yar, and the other 3 on the statue, Nikolai Trusevich, Alexei Klemenko and Vanya Kuzmenko, were shot during one of the many mass executions. The surviving players would never be able to tell the truth. The Soviet government had created their own version of events, and publicly doubting that could have had grave consequences.
В школе, так уже это было известно, что всех там-то расстреляли.
Several generations of Dynamo Kiev players were brought up on this story and looked at the players of FC Start as an inspiration.
Ну, пошли уже вот эти мифы. Его назвали матчем это смерти.
It's perhaps understandable to an extent why the Soviets felt the need to dress up the story of FC Start. After losing in the region of 20 million people in the Second World War, here was a tale of bravery and resistance. The players themselves had to go along with the official version until the fall of communism. But what is certain is they were heroes, they did play here, and they were a phenomenally good football side.